The night was very quiet in Sheema village. Everyone was sleeping peacefully. Suddenly, the ground began to shake deep inside the forest. Birds flew out of the trees in great fear. A deep, heavy growl, like the sound of a mighty beast, moved through the darkness. It sounded like something that had been sleeping for over 100 years had just opened its eyes. People jumped out of their beds, afraid. Something very old had woken up. Every year, the people of Sheema held a big festival to honor Ngulu, the powerful god who protected their land and farms. When the sun set, they killed goats and sheep as a sacrifice beside Ngulu's big stone statue in the forest. After eating and dancing, they chose the most beautiful unmarried young girl in the village. She was dressed in fine clothes and taken to sit beside the statue until midnight. Everyone called her the Night Princess. The elders said that if Ngulu woke up at midnight and did not see a night princess waiting for him, he would become angry and send a terrible sickness that would kill many people. For many years, people thought this was just an old story to scare children. The girls would sit for some hours and return home safely. Nothing bad had happened for a very long time. Only one man, old Mzee Kalu, who was blind, kept warning everyone. He was the only person still alive who had seen Ngulu wake up many years ago. He would say with a serious voice, "When Ngulu wakes and there is no night princess waiting, he brings death." But the people did not listen. They laughed and said, "Mzee Kalu is just old and afraid of the dark," until that night when the ground shook and the fearful growl filled the air. That night everyone knew Ngulu had truly woken up. This year the honor fell on Nalumbe. She was the most beautiful young girl in the whole of Sheema. Everyone agreed. Her skin shone softly under the moonlight, and her eyes were bright like clean stream water. When she smiled, even old women felt happy in their hearts. That night, Nalumbe sat alone beside the big stone statue of Ngulu. The cool breeze played with her hair. She looked up at the full moon, and the moon seemed to look back at her with love. Hours passed. Crickets sang. Owls called. Everything was calm, but as midnight drew near, Nalumbe became tired and restless. "No god really wakes up," she said quietly to herself. "This is just an old story. Nothing will happen if I go home." She stood up, stretched her arms, and started walking back to the village. A few minutes later, the gentle breeze suddenly changed. It became strong and angry. Young trees bent almost to the ground. Nalumbe stopped and looked around. The forest had become very dark. Then she heard it, a low, deep growl. Another growl, louder, then a mighty roar that made the leaves fall from the trees like rain. Nalumbe's heart nearly stopped. There had been no wolves in Sheema for many, many years. She turned and began to run. The growls followed her. The wind ran after her like an angry spirit. Dry branches broke behind her, crack, crack, as if something heavy was coming fast. Nalumbe ran with all her strength, screaming, "Help! Help me!" The moment her feet touched the village ground, the wind stopped. Everything became quiet again. She fell to the ground, shaking and crying. Her mother and many villagers rushed to her. "A wolf chased me. Something big was behind me," Nalumbe cried. The people shook their heads. "You were alone in the dark. You only imagined it," they said. "It was just the wind and your fear." Nalumbe swore again and again, "I am telling the truth." Then a weak, old voice spoke from the shadows. It was not a wolf. It was Ngulu. Everyone turned. It was Mzee Kalu, the blind elder, standing at the door of his small hut. His milky eyes looked straight ahead, but everyone felt he could see everything. Mzee Kalu stepped forward slowly. That night, he began to tell them the full story of what really happened many years ago. when Ngulu last woke up angry. Mzee Kalu stood quietly in the middle of the frightened crowd. He touched the empty places where his eyes used to be and began to speak in his slow, steady voice. "When I was only 8 years old," he said, "my own mother took a hot stick and blinded me. She cried as she did it, but she said it was the only way. Anyone who looks straight at Ngulu with their eyes will catch the terrible sickness and go mad. That is why she took my sight, so that I could face him without fear and send him back to sleep." He raised a small dry gourd that hung from his waist. This gourd holds the Kumba Ash. It is the only thing strong enough to make Ngulu sleep again. The black wolf you saw is his guardian spirit. It stops anyone from coming close unless they carry the ash. Before Mzee Kalu could explain more, a fierce whirlwind rushed into the village like an angry giant. Dust filled the sky. Sleeping mats flew high, rooftops shook. Pots fell and broke. "Cover your eyes, do not look," Mzee Kalu shouted with all the strength in his old body. But the storm came too fast. The mighty wind knocked Mzee Kalu to the ground. The small gourd slipped from his hand and rolled far away in the dust. Then they saw it. Inside the black spinning wind stood a tall, dark figure, like a vampire from old stories, but taller and more terrible. Beside the figure walked a huge black wolf. Its eyes burned red like hot coals in the night. Some people ran. Some people screamed. Some people stood still and stared straight at the god. The tall figure raised its head. In a deep voice that sounded older than the hills, Ngulu spoke words in the ancient tongue of the ancestors. Amagezi, gamwe, gaggwe. Okufa, kwammwe, kutandise. Mzee Kalu translated with a trembling voice. "Your wisdom is finished. Your death has begun." At that moment, everyone who had looked straight at Ngulu started to shake. They screamed in pain. They fell to the ground and began to scratch their own faces until blood came. The terrible plague had started. The village of Sheema now knew real fear. In the middle of all the crying and confusion stood a young orphan girl named Maleena. For many years, Mzee Kalu had raised her like his own daughter. He had trained her every day how to fight with her eyes covered, how to hear the smallest footstep, how to feel the direction of the wind on her skin. From the day she was 12, Maleena had been having dreams about Ngulu. Mzee Kalu told her, "If Ngulu visits your dreams, it means you are chosen. Now the time had come." Quickly, Maleena tied a thick cloth over her eyes so she could not see the god. She picked up the precious gourd of Kumba Ash that had rolled away, and she dragged the weak old man back into his hut, away from the storm. Inside the dark hut, Mzee Kalu held her hand with the little strength he had left. "You dreamt of him," he whispered. "You are the one now. Finish what must be done. Fight blind, just the way I taught you." Maleena stepped outside to carry the crying children to safety. Suddenly, another powerful blast of wind hit the hut. Part of the roof flew away like paper. Maleena ran back inside, shouting, "Baba! Baba Kalu!" But the old man was no longer breathing. He had used his last strength to pass the duty to her. Maleena knelt beside his body and cried until the sky began to grow pale. Morning came, grey and cold. Sheema village looked like a bad dream. People who had looked at Ngulu were now mad. Some walked in circles, talking to themselves and spitting. Others lay on the ground, fighting for every breath. Mothers held their children and cried loud, long tears. Maleena wiped her face. There was no more time for crying. She tied the blindfold even tighter. She hung the gourd of Kumba Ash safely at her waist. She took her sharp spear in her hand. Then, all alone, she walked straight into the forest. She followed the sound of the angry wind and the deep growls that rolled between the trees. With every step, the forest grew darker and quieter, until only the wind and the growls remained. Maleena held her spear ready. The roaring became louder. He was very close now. Suddenly, the black wolf jumped out of the darkness. Its hot breath brushed her face. Its teeth shone like knives. The real fight had begun. Maleena could not see, but she could hear everything. She heard the wolf's heavy paws shake the ground. She felt its hot breath. She felt the wind change direction just before it attacked. It rushed at her from the left. She raised her spear to block, but the wolf was too strong. The blow threw her hard into the dirt. Her spear flew from her hand. The wolf jumped again. Its sharp teeth passed only a finger's length from her throat. Maleena rolled away fast, found the spear on the ground, and stabbed blindly. The wolf caught the wooden handle in its jaws and broke it into two with one bite. Its claws slashed her arm. Warm blood ran down to her fingers. Maleena forced herself to stay calm. She listened harder than ever. The wolf gathered itself and charged straight at her. At the last second, Maleena rolled aside. She grabbed the broken half of the spear and drove it deep into the wolf's chest with all the power in her body. The wolf gave a terrible scream that shook the trees. Then it fell to the ground and moved no more. Maleena dropped to her knees, breathing hard, her whole body shaking. Blood dripped from her arm, but the fight was not finished. A mighty whirlwind rose around her, louder than thunder. Ngulu himself was coming. Maleena quickly opened the small gourd. With trembling fingers, she scooped a handful of the Kumba Ash. She felt the god behind her, tall, cold, and angry. The air became heavy, like a mountain pressing down. The wind struck her again and forced her to her knees. She stayed on her knees, quiet and still, listening. The storm circled. Closer, closer. When the next powerful blast came, Maleena lifted her hand and blew the Kumba Ash straight into the heart of the whirlwind. A roar bigger than anything she had ever heard exploded through the forest. The whirlwind twisted and fought like a living thing. Then, all at once, it fell apart and disappeared. Silence returned. Even the crickets were afraid to sing. Ngulu had gone back to his long sleep. Back in the village, something wonderful began to happen. One by one, the people who had gone mad opened their eyes and drew their names again. Those who could not breathe earlier sat up and took deep, sweet breaths. Mothers hugged their children. Children stopped crying and started laughing. The people of Sheema came together and mourned Mzee Kalu with songs and tears. They buried him with honor, but after the mourning, they lifted Maleena high onto their shoulders. They carried her through every path in the village, singing and dancing. From that day, everyone called her a new name full of respect, Omubazi wa Sheema, the hero of Sheema. And for many, many years after, when children asked, "Who saved our village?" the elders would smile and answer, "Maleena, the brave girl who fought with her eyes closed and won." And that is how the story of Maleena and the awakening of Ngulu is still told today.